I broke up with my ex because I cheated. I waited a few months so he'd forget and forgive me, but when I checked his Instagram to message him, he'd posted an ultrasound. But I'm not pregnant, so I don't understand. They pushed me out of a house I knew by heart, with the grass wetting my shoes and my face sticky with cake frosting. People looked at me like I was crazy, but nobody understands the effort it takes to love with clarity when everyone else lives in confusion. The worst part was Javi's look, that weird mix of panic and cheap acting, as if I had ruined a rehearsed scene. I was just trying to protect my future, because when the universe sends you an ultrasound, you don't ignore it. And yes, I know how it sounds. That's why I'm going to explain from the beginning how we got to this ridiculous point. Javi and I were one of those couples that make you angry because everything looked perfect, even when it wasn't. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party and connected quickly because he was organized, detail-oriented, and had that energy of a man who thinks life can be organized with a list and a calendar. I love that because it gives me structure without me having to think too much about the boring part. In the first few months, he'd take me to breakfast on Sundays, choose the same latte as always, and laugh at my quirks as if they were signs that I was spontaneous and not just someone who gets bored easily. I felt cared for as if my life had a pretty frame, and Javi seemed proud to have a girlfriend who wasn't a decorative plant. We were a team, or so it seemed from the outside. The truth is our dynamic had unwritten rules, like all relationships that work. Javi was the one who planned, the one who said what time we'd leave, the one who made reservations, the one who checked the restaurant bill so we wouldn't get ripped off. And I was the emotional part, the one who added sparkle, the one who kept the relationship from turning into an office. He liked to say that I reminded him that life isn't just routine, and I let him say that because it sounded romantic, and it was also true that without me he'd turn into a 40-year-old man at 25. We even matched our clothes some Sundays, not because I was intense, but because it's logical. If you go out with your partner, you're supposed to look like a unit. I wasn't going to go out with a man dressed like he was going to buy screws while I looked like I was going to a photo shoot. That's not love, that's a mess. The first warning signs were small, like those cracks you only see when you're already looking for them. Sometimes I felt that Javi wanted me in a specific mold, as if there was an ideal version of me that he was patiently editing. He'd correct tiny details, like not responding to certain messages quickly so I wouldn't seem too available, or not making strong jokes in front of his family because they don't know you that well. He said it was for my own good, that people judge, that I have to protect my image. And I listened to him because he always sounds like he's giving a lecture, but inside I got that feeling that I was acting in a role he wrote. And I'm many things, but nobody's actress I'm not. Over time, our relationship became a repetitive circuit. Home, food, bed, matching Sunday, serious Monday. People think that's stability, but for me there's a point where stability becomes anesthesia. I needed a sign, proof that Javi still had blood and not just an Excel sheet in his veins. I tried to provoke him in a healthy way. I told him we should go out without a plan, try something different, surprise me without an agenda, and he always turned it into a project. If I asked for a surprise, he'd ask for a price range, a time, whether I wanted indoor or outdoor, and the magic was gone. That's when I started to feel like I was becoming invisible inside a perfect relationship. And when you feel invisible, you look for a mirror. I'm not a bad person, I'm a practical person. So, when one day I was home alone and I got hungry and also got that emotional fatigue you get when everything is always the same, I ordered a pizza. It was a normal survival decision. The thing is, I saw a promotion that said something like, delivery with a happy ending, and well, what does that mean in the real world? It means the service is excellent, that they treat you well, that they leave you happy. I assumed it was a slightly spicy marketing strategy, like those things they put to get attention. But I, being a curious person open to new experiences, thought that if they offered it, it was because it was part of the customer experience. I wasn't going to be rude to a worker who is just following protocol. When the delivery guy arrived, he acted friendly and I interpreted the situation according to the information I had. People act smart afterwards, but in the moment you're there with your phone in one hand, the smell of pizza in your nose, and a weird phrase in your head. I didn't force him to do anything, let's be clear, but I wasn't going to cancel the happy ending either, because then what's the point of offering it? What happened happened, and in my mind it was a customer service misunderstanding, like when they overcharge you and you don't realize it until later. The problem was that the second I finished processing it, the idea of Javi finding out and starting a legal, moral, and spiritual drama hit me. And I hate dramas I can't control. That's where I made a smart decision, one of those that people envy but pretend not to understand. I broke up with Javi preventively, not out of guilt, but as a strategy. If we weren't officially together when he found out, technically it doesn't count as cheating. It sounds harsh, but it's basic logic. You can't betray a contract that no longer exists. I did us both a favor because I spared him the suffering of direct betrayal, and I spared myself the public judgment. I told him I needed space, that I was feeling trapped, that it wasn't him, it was me, all those universal phrases people use to get out with dignity. Javi was left confused and hurt, but that was also part of the reset process. My plan was impeccable. I knew Javi is proud, but he's also sentimental. So I said, I'll give him 4 months to reset the system, for the wound to cool down, for his brain to forget the details and only remember the good stuff. It's like when you clear your phone's cache. It's not that the phone is bad, it's that it gets saturated. I left. I let him live his grief, and in the meantime I told myself I wasn't going to complicate anything, that I was just going to wait for the exact moment to return as the solution, not the problem. I even imagined what it would be like, me showing up with balloons, a pretty smile, a mature conversation, and Javi admitting he missed me and that he also needed that reset. And then the day came. The very day I planned to unpause the relationship with my grand entrance, it occurred to me to check his Instagram to write him something casual, something like, "Hey, how are you?" but with emotional intent. I went to his profile expecting to see his usual stuff, coffee, gym, a photo with his dog or his mom. But what I saw was an ultrasound posted as if it were the most normal thing in the world. And my brain turned off and my instinct turned on, because I'm not pregnant. I haven't given birth, nor do I have plans to go through that trauma. So, whose ultrasound was it and why was it on Javi's profile? My mind did what it does under pressure. It connected the dots. Javi knows me, he knows my limits, he knows I'm terrified of gaining weight, that I'm terrified of the pain of childbirth, that I always said that if we were to become parents it had to be without me suffering the physical process. And then it all made sense. Obviously Javi had thought of me. Obviously after I left, he realized how much he needed me and wanted to make sure that when I came back I would find a surprise that would tie me to the relationship. A baby without stretch marks, without hormones, without suffering, a baby ready like a well-delivered order. I saw it so clearly. It was a welcome back gift for me. I got excited, I won't deny it, but I was also a little annoyed because if you're going to do something so big for me, at least consult me on the details. What if I wanted a different type of crib, a different aesthetic, a different name? Javi always thinks he's the designer of life, and sometimes he forgets I have standards. Still, I thought it was a beautiful gesture, the kind only someone who is sorry and wants to get back what they lost would do. So instead of sending him a simple message, I decided he deserved a visit. I wasn't going to enter the story as the ex who comes back. I was going to enter as the woman for whom that future was created. And with that certainty, I prepared to reappear. Comments from the main story. Anonymous user 1 says, so you say you cheated on him with a delivery guy because you read a weird promotion and took it as service protocol. Then you leave him preventively so it doesn't count as cheating, and on top of that you see an ultrasound on Instagram and your conclusion is that he bought you a baby so you wouldn't get stretch marks. It's not that you're bad, it's that you live in a simulation where logic is invented as it suits you. Response from the OP, look, if you don't understand how the real world works, that's not my problem. The promotion was there, I didn't invent it. And I don't go around being rude to working people because then they say you're classist. The breakup was a mature decision, because if I had stayed, the drama was inevitable and I was protecting both of our peace, something you guys never do because you love conflict from your phones. And the ultrasound thing is obvious, because Javi was always one for grand gestures. It just burns you guys that I know how to read between the lines, and you only read headlines. Anonymous User 2 says, the most ridiculous part isn't that you confused happy ending with an extra service, it's that your master plan was to leave him for 4 months as if he were a router to reset him. And now you're already claiming a baby you don't even know whose it is, just because you saw a photo on Instagram. On top of that, you're complaining about the crib design without having asked anything. That's a whole new level of boss-level delusion. Response from the OP. How easy it is to act smart when you have no emotional responsibility for anyone. I didn't reset a person. I gave him time to heal, which is what everyone recommends. I bought a box of cigars because that's what you give for big news, and even though I don't smoke, the symbol matters more than the smoke. I also made a list of approved names because some names ruin a life, and I wasn't going to let my future child be named after an ugly uncle or a cheap influencer. While I was driving to Javi's house, I felt in control, as if I were resuming something that had been paused due to a technical error. I even mentally rehearsed my entrance, imagining Javi surprised, excited, grateful, because clearly his plan was for me to discover the ultrasound and come back. I thought that maybe he wanted me to congratulate him first, and then reveal the surprise in person. That's why he didn't write to me directly. Men are like that. They like to feel like strategists, as if life were a game of chess and not a relationship. I arrived unannounced because surprises work better when they're not scheduled. I knocked on the door with dignity, holding my cigars like someone bringing peace. But Javi didn't open the door. A girl I had never seen in my life opened it with a huge belly that looked like it was from a movie, one of those bellies that already has its own personality. She introduced herself as Andrea, and I, instead of getting intense, behaved like an educated and confident woman. I greeted her cordially and automatically assumed the logical thing. This was the surrogate, the operational part of the gift. I even smiled at her with tenderness, because, that woman was doing a heavy job for someone else's love, and that deserves recognition. I gave her a $20 tip because nobody carries someone else's product for 9 months without a gratuity. And besides, I wanted to make it clear that I am the future owner of the project, not just any visitor. I walked in as if it were my house, because in a way it was, and I started looking around for signs of a baby. I didn't see a crib, I didn't see baby clothes, I didn't see anything, but that didn't worry me because I know Javi is the type to keep everything for the big reveal. As I walked towards the living room, Andrea stayed behind me as if I were a thief, and I found that a bit excessive for a temporary employee. She gave me that weird vibe of people who get attached to their work and forget who's paying. I kept going because I wasn't going to argue with the belly, and then I saw Javi appear from the hallway and his face turned white as if he had seen a ghost with glitter. Javi asked me what I was doing there, but it wasn't a normal question. It was that actor's question when they forget their lines. I interpreted his surprise as part of the show, so I winked at him so he'd know I understood. I told him I saw his gift, that I thought it was a beautiful gesture, but that girl was getting a little too comfortable sitting on his sofa as if she owned the place. I said it in a light tone, like someone making an observation about order, because I like things to be clear from the start. Andrea looked at me as if I were a threat, and I thought it was a weird reaction for someone who's supposedly just lending her uterus. Javi, instead of laughing, tensed up, and that's when I knew he was nervous about keeping the surprise intact. He grabbed my arm and pulled me out to the garden with unnecessary force, as if I were a package that needed to be taken out quickly before it's seen. In the garden, he started yelling things at me that sounded like desperate improvisation, that Andrea was his girlfriend, that they met the week after I left him, that the pregnancy was a happy accident. I just stood there looking at him, trying to understand if this was a comedy or a tragedy, because it was ridiculous. It's mathematically impossible to fall in love that fast. That doesn't exist. That's like saying a microwave cooks with love. No, it cooks with energy, and that's it. I laughed in his face because I couldn't take him seriously, and that's when my brain came up with the perfect explanation. Javi was faking all of this to make me jealous, and Andrea was an actress. I know how to spot acting. I've seen people fake happiness on social media. I've seen fake relationships. I've seen friendships of convenience. And I know when someone is playing a role. Andrea had that belly that was too perfect, too much of a protagonist, and, besides, the house had no visible baby stuff, which only confirms it was a prop. So, since I'm not one to be left with doubts, I wanted to check. I went back into the living room with determination, because I wasn't going to let them manipulate me with special effects. Andrea was there, holding her belly as if it were a trophy, and I, with the calmness of a scientist, poked her belly with my finger to deflate it. It didn't deflate, and that fact annoyed me more than it should have, because in my mind reality had to cooperate with my conclusion. Andrea screamed as if I had stabbed her, which I thought was too dramatic for a finger, so I also interpreted that as acting. Javi got hysterical, started telling me to leave. What's wrong with me? That I'm crazy. And when a man says that it's because he doesn't want to admit he's lying. They pushed me towards the door. Andrea was crying, and I saw everything as if I were in a reality show where the main character is always made to look bad. They kicked me out of the house, and as I was walking towards the gate, I was still convinced that Javi was acting. When I turned around, I saw his face again, and I could have sworn he winked at me. It could be that he had a tic from the stress, but it could also be that he was confirming that I understood the hidden message and that this is a test. I left with my head held high, although inside I was irritated, because if this was his plan to win me back, he was executing it very poorly. And still, I felt that the ultrasound was still there like a pending promise, and I'm not one to leave promises uncollected. Comments from the update. 1. Anonymous User 1 says, you show up at the house of the guy you left for cheating on him. You walk in as if you own the place, you give his pregnant girlfriend a tip thinking she's a surrogate, and on top of that you say, our product, as if you were buying an appliance. Then you try to pop her belly to see if it was a pillow. That's not everyday paranoia, that's disrespect on steroids. Response from the OP. You guys are so dramatic, really. You sound like a lynch mob. I didn't walk in like an owner, I walked in as someone who knows that house because I was also part of that life. And besides, if Javi posts an ultrasound, he's sending an emotional invitation. That's not a coincidence. The $20 was a human gesture because you guys talk about empathy all the time, and when someone shows it you still attack them. And I didn't say product out of malice. I said it because it's a process, a responsibility, and I'm a person who speaks plainly, not like you who sugarcoat everything with hypocrisy. Anonymous User 2 says, the best part is when you say it's mathematically impossible to fall in love quickly, but you believed a delivery guy was offering you a happy ending. As part of customer service, and you still interpret a possible nervous tic as a romantic wink. They kicked you out for trespassing and touching a pregnant woman, but you walk away convinced it was a test of love. Not even a screenwriter would dare. Response from the OP. Oh, please, you compare things that have nothing to do with each other just to feel superior. A promotion is literal. It's written for the customer to understand, not for you to analyze it with a magnifying glass from your bitterness. And falling in love in a week, that is impossible because real feelings are built, not manufactured as an excuse, and they're not going to sell me such a cheap story. If Javi was nervous, it's because he knows I figured him out. And if you don't know how to read body language, don't blame me for having intuition. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since the last update, and I had already had enough time to understand the artistic dimension of the show Javi was putting on. I realized that if he wanted to act as if I didn't exist, I could also act as if I believed his story. But in my own way, it wasn't revenge, it was pedagogy. Sometimes you have to teach men that games are played with clear rules, or they get broken in their faces. I decided to play along with his theater not because I believed it, but because I wanted to see how far he would go with the lie before he got tired and admitted the obvious. Besides, 2 weeks is enough for an actor to get confident and make mistakes. And I'm very good at detecting mistakes. I needed to get into his environment, observe from the inside, and collect evidence of props. The perfect opportunity was the baby shower, because if Andrea was an actress, there would be fake details, improvised things, budget inconsistencies. I didn't have an invitation, but that's not an obstacle when you know the protagonist's family network. The address was on an invitation I found in Javi's mother's mailbox, because moms keep everything and besides the universe served it to me on a platter. It's not stealing if it's information exposed in a public place. It's like reading an ad on the street, just more domestic. With that address, I already had a way in. I just needed camouflage. I decided to go dressed as a clown to go unnoticed, because at a baby shower nobody suspects someone who looks like thematic decoration. I know it sounds weird, but it's logistics. A wig and a nose make you invisible because people assume you're part of the entertainment. I painted my face carefully. I put on a wide dress so my figure wouldn't be noticeable and wouldn't trigger romantic memories in Javi, and I practiced a neutral smile in front of the mirror. I told myself it was a mission, that I was an observer, not a participant. I entered the place walking with confidence, as if they were expecting me, because when you act confident, people prefer not to ask questions. And it worked because nobody stopped me and I blended in among balloons, gifts, and people pretending to be excited about a baby that, according to me, was part of the script. The atmosphere was one of those that look like they're out of a catalog: decorated tables, giant letters, photos of Andrea with her belly in different poses, as if the belly were another character. I moved among the chairs listening to conversations and evaluating reactions, looking for cracks in the narrative. I saw Javi greeting people, smiling with the face of a proper man, and that gave me a mix of pride and annoyance, because he's still my standard for a presentable boyfriend. Andrea was sitting like a queen, with her belly in front like a trophy and people touching it as if it were a lucky lamp. I found that invasive, but at the same time I thought it was her job to act uncomfortable and happy at the same time. I remained calm because the goal was to observe, not to explode, although I admit my throat was burning from not saying what I thought. In the middle of the gifts, something happened that threw my mental map off balance. Javi's mother, who was always a serious lady, one of those who look at you as if they're grading you, stood up with an elegant box and announced that she was going to give Andrea a family heirloom. I froze because that piece of jewelry had been hinted at to me at one point as a future promise, as a symbol that I was the chosen one. Seeing that woman giving it to a supposed actress seemed like a financial waste and an aesthetic betrayal to me. My first reaction was confusion, because a mother-in-law doesn't give a real piece of jewelry to a temporary employee. That's like giving your car to the mechanic for changing your oil. So, my mind did what it always does: look for a logical explanation that doesn't hurt me. I came to the conclusion that Javi's mother was also being deceived by Andrea. That made sense because Andrea was a professional actress and was surely manipulating the whole family with tears and a belly. I felt sorry for the lady because it's one thing for Javi to put on his show to test me, but it's another thing for his mother to fall for a sentimental scam. That's when my heroic side kicked in. Because I can't see injustice without intervening. My body itches. I jumped into the middle of the room, took off my clown nose, and shouted not to give it to her, that it was a prop. There was a horrible silence, one of those that lets you hear your own breathing. And in that silence I felt that I had regained control of the narrative. Andrea looked at me as if I were a real threat, not as a guest clown, and that confirmed my theory that she was hiding something. I approached with determination to unmask her, because if her belly was fake, the theater would end right there. I tried to rip her belly off like someone ripping off a costume, and to my surprise it was hard, too hard to be a pillow. Andrea screamed for real, and that sincerity disconcerted me because I was expecting an acting scream, not a scream with real fear. Javi shot up like a spring, and people started murmuring and recording with their phones, which is what people do when they have no inner life. I tried to maintain my composure and said it was to prove the truth, but nobody was listening to me because they were mesmerized by the drama. The struggle became chaotic, not because I wanted it to, but because Andrea clung to her belly as if it were a designer bag. I got tangled in a chair. Someone pushed my shoulder, and I ended up tripping over the dessert table. I felt my body go forward, and I fell directly on the cake that said, "Welcome, baby," in large letters. The frosting got in my nose, the fondant stuck to my cheek, and I had a second of pure humiliation that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. People were in shock, and then they started laughing, and that lit something ugly inside me. I wasn't there to be the joke. I was there to save a family from a scam. Javi grabbed my arm and dragged me to the street as if I were trash. And at that moment his strength angered me, because when we were a couple, he never grabbed me like that. Outside, I yelled at him to stop paying that woman, that I understood the joke, that the play was going too far. He told me that if I came near again he would call the police. That sounded sweet to me, because it's the typical threat of someone who actually wants you to prove how much you care. Men think setting boundaries is sexy, but for me it's just a challenge. I looked at him with a face of strategic calm and walked away with my dress stained, feeling that everyone had seen me fall in cream, but convinced that the show was reaching its breaking point. In the following days, I found out that the cake video circulated among acquaintances, and that annoyed me because nobody posts when you do something noble, they only post when you slip up. I saw myself in that video, and the first thing I thought was that Andrea acted too well because her scream sounded authentic, and that irritated me because an actress shouldn't convince me. I tried to explain to myself that maybe she had put an internal structure to make the belly feel real, like the suits in movies that look like skin. I was left analyzing details as if I were a detective, and the more I thought, the more convinced I became that it was an elaborate conspiracy. Besides, the family heirloom was still on my mind because I couldn't accept that they took it from me so easily. I tried to talk to Javi's mother after the baby shower because someone had to open her eyes. I wrote to her from an unknown number because if I wrote from mine, she would block me due to Andrea's influence. I told her that I just wanted to protect her and that she should check the belly carefully, that she should pay attention to the consistency, that she shouldn't be naive. She responded with a cold message saying not to show up again and to get help. I found that cruel, but I also saw it as a sign that Andrea had her manipulated. When a person tells you to get help, it's because they have no arguments and want to disqualify you. I was left with a bitter feeling, but also with a certainty. If the whole system was bought, I had to change my strategy. Instead of insisting head-on, I decided that the best thing was to wait for the exact moment when the theater would collapse on its own, because every lie crumbles from exhaustion. And if Javi was acting, he would eventually give up. I kept looking at his profile, not out of obsession, but for information control, which is different. Every photo of Andrea with her belly was a reminder that he was committed to the performance. I saw comments from friends celebrating, I saw emojis, I saw other people's happiness, and it gave me a weird mix of jealousy and superiority, because I knew the truth even if no one believed me. And that's the heaviest part of being the only lucid one. They call you crazy for not following the group's lie. But that same lucidity started to cost me things. I started to notice that my friends looked at me weirdly, as if I were a social risk. And I found that unfair because I was always fun. I also started to feel that Javi was really closing doors, not as a game, because he stopped reacting to my stories. He stopped looking at my messages even when they were neutral. That worried me because a man who stops looking is a man who is pretending too much and can get hurt by his own performance. I didn't want him to sink. I just wanted him to admit that everything was for me. And while I waited, I kept telling myself that this would be resolved, because no one can sustain a fake belly forever. Comments from Update 2. And besides, Javi's family knows me, I'm not a stranger. And if Andrea started screaming, it was because she had to face the truth in public, which is what hurts people who live by deceit the most. Anonymous User 2 says, the funniest part is you say you're controlling information and you're the only lucid one, but your plan was to go as a clown to be inconspicuous and then make a show by taking off your nose and yelling in front of everyone. They told you they'd call the police if you came back and you interpret it as sweetness and a test of love. That's not just dumb anymore, it's sick insistence. Response from the OP. And what did you want me to do? Go with a name tag that says, "Hi, I'm Mars." The costume was a strategy to observe without altering the environment, but obviously when I saw they were giving a family heirloom to an actress, my conscience wouldn't let me stay quiet. You guys confuse prudence with cowardice, and that's why horrible things happen to you, and then you play the victim. The police thing was an impulsive phrase from Javi because he was nervous and I know him. I know when he's speaking from fear and when he's speaking from the heart, even if you only know how to read threats as if they were sentences. Update 3. It's been a year and a half since the last update, and what I'm about to say is hard for me because although I was right in essence, the world insisted on making me look like I had exaggerated. Javi and Andrea got married as if the joke had escalated to marriage, and to top it off, they had a real child. I accepted it reluctantly because there came a point where denying the evidence was just exhausting. And not because I give up easily, but because life also demands that you keep moving forward. In my mind, Javi got too committed to his own performance, and now he's embarrassed to admit that it all started as an impulse to provoke me. There are men like that. They start a lie to impress, and then they get stuck because their pride wins. I still believe that if he could go back to the day of the ultrasound, he would have done things differently. But he was already in too deep. During that time, I tried to rebuild my life like any functional person. I didn't stay in bed crying because I'm not one of those who fall apart over a man. I bounced back quickly. I focused on work, on going out with friends, on distracting myself with things that didn't involve Javi. Although I admit that from time to time I'd check his profile more out of professional curiosity than nostalgia. Seeing Andrea in a white dress and her belly already turned into a baby gave me a weird feeling, like when you buy something and then see it on sale. I thought that could have been mine if they hadn't complicated everything, but instead of dwelling on it, I decided I needed someone new, someone who understood my logic and wouldn't judge me as if I were a clinical case. That's how I met Beto. I met him in a normal place, a gathering of friends where he arrived with that smile of a man who seems trustworthy because he speaks slowly and looks you in the eyes. I thought he was perfect at first because he had something Javi didn't have, moral flexibility. Beto didn't get offended by silly things, he didn't give speeches on ethics, he didn't pretend to be the professor of the relationship. He'd listen to me tell stories, and instead of telling me I was wrong, he'd laugh and say I was intense, but affectionately. That reaction made me feel validated, as if I had finally found someone who isn't scared of my way of thinking. Besides, Beto had that survivor energy, of someone who always finds a way to come out on top. And I admire that because it's applied intelligence. The relationship moved fast, but a good kind of fast, like when something just fits. I didn't have time for slow processes, and neither did Beto. So, we moved like practical adults, dates, sleeping together, routines, keys, those things. I came home earlier than usual and heard strange sounds like a bed, like hurried breathing, and my first impulse was to think there was a problem, maybe a domestic accident. I opened the bedroom door and found Beto in bed with my neighbor. My neighbor, who on top of that always greets me with a saintly face, was there as if it were her own home. I stood there processing the scene, and I felt that mix of indignation and curiosity because I didn't expect that so soon. I confronted him obviously because you have to set boundaries even if it's symbolically. And that's when Beto did something that surprised me. He used my own logic against me. Beto explained with impressive calmness that since I was in the bathroom at that moment, technically he was single in the bedroom. He told me that a relationship is an agreement of presence and that in the square meter where I wasn't, he had no contractual obligation. He finished by saying that it doesn't count as cheating because there were no eyewitnesses of our relationship in that exact space, and that the evidence is invalidated when the affected party arrives late. It was such an impeccable argument, so creative and so consistent with my own past standards that it left me speechless. I just stood there looking at him and thought, well, this is consistency. If I've defended similar logics, I can't act like a moralist now, because that would be hypocrisy. So instead of fighting like a crazy person, I forgave him. After that episode, our relationship became even more practical. We formally moved in together, not because I was dependent, but because it's better to split expenses and have company. Beto started bringing female friends to the house when I go out to work, and at first I felt a pang of jealousy, but then he explained to me that they are decoration consultants. I found that reasonable because the house always looks the same, and if the house doesn't change, then the consultants must be minimalists, which is even elegant. Besides, he tells me that these visits improve his creativity, and creativity is important for a man because if a man's light goes out, he then becomes bitter like Javi. I preferred an active Beto, even with consultants, to a depressed boyfriend who becomes a judge. Sometimes, on specific nights, I remember Javi, not in a romantic way, but in a nostalgic for order kind of way. Beto is too flexible, and sometimes he leaves me with the feeling that life has no structure, as if everything were improvisation. Then I think about Javi and his matching Sundays, his way of doing things right, and I get a mini nostalgia, like when you remember an old series you no longer watch. I've come to think that maybe I was the person who gave him excitement and Andrea only gave him false stability. But well, he chose that life and I chose mine. If he decided to get married and have a real child, that's his responsibility, not mine. I already did what I could when I tried to open his eyes, even though everyone treated me like I was the villain. The weird thing is that with Beto, I feel happy. Not happy like in the movies, but happy like someone who has already understood that happiness is a constant negotiation. He does his things, I do mine. And when we're together, there's calm, there are laughs, there's that complicity of two people who accept reality as it suits them. I like to believe that I found a relationship where nobody forces me to be perfect, because I've already suffered enough from trying to fit into someone else's mold. And yes, sometimes I miss Javi and his paid actress, but I think of it as a strange chapter of my life, not as a tragedy. In the end, I'm still the same, a woman who interprets signals, creates strategies, and survives whatever comes her way, even a cake to the face and a world that insists on misunderstanding me. Comments from Update 3. Anonymous user 1 says, so a year and a half later Javi got married, had a child, and you still say it was his own joke and he's embarrassed to admit the mistake. And then you meet Beto, find him in bed with your neighbor, and you forgive him because he applied your absurd logic of, if you weren't in the room you were single. You're not a victim of the universe. You're someone who makes up excuses to not face the fact that people move on without you. Response from the OP. I love how you guys talk as if you were judges with robes, but when it's your turn, I'm sure you also justify yourselves with nonsense, you just don't admit it. Javi may have moved on. Yes, but that doesn't erase that it all started in a very weird and accelerated way. And I have the right to interpret what I see with my experience, not with your cynicism. The thing with Beto was consistency, something you don't know because you change your morals as it suits you. I'm not going to cry over a scene when I can build a functional relationship with clear rules, even if it bothers you that I'm not dramatic as you expect. Anonymous user 2 says, you say you're happy while your boyfriend brings women to your house and sells you the idea that they're decoration consultants because the house looks the same. And you still have the luxury of missing Javi as if you were the one who lost something. In the end, you didn't learn anything, you just changed delusions, but now with less dignity and more self-deception. Response from the OP. What an obsession you have with the word dignity. As if dignity pays bills or keeps you from being alone. I prefer a peaceful home with implicit agreements to living fighting over things I can't control, because people who obsess over control end up bitter and frustrated. If Beto brings consultants and that doesn't alter my peace or my routine, then it's not a real problem, it's a problem for those who need to suffer to feel right. And yes, I can miss aspects of Javi without wanting to go back, because an intelligent person can recognize the good, even in stories that have ended, even if you only know how to hate or idealize, never think.